My golden brother demanded half my business after years of no contact, and my mom backed him up, saying he's 10 times better than me. So I taught them a lesson they'll never forget for the rest of their lives. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but after everything that's happened in the past few months, I need to get this off my chest. I 35 male a software engineer who built a successful cybersecurity consulting firm from the ground up. My company now employs 47 people and generates about $12 million annually. Not bad for someone who started coding in his parents' basement 15 years ago. But this story isn't really about my success. It's about my toxic family and how they tried to destroy everything I'd worked for when they realized I'd actually made something of myself. Let me start with some background. I have a younger brother, Jake, who's 32. Growing up, Jake was the golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, especially our mothers. While I was the quiet, studious kid who spent his time learning programming languages and building computers, Jake was the charming, athletic one who played varsity football and had girls constantly calling the house. Our parents, particularly Mom, made it crystal clear who their favorite was. When Jake needed a car for his 16th birthday, they bought him a brand new Mustang. When I turned 16 6 months later, they handed me the keys to our old Honda Civic that was already 8 years old and had 150,000 miles on it. When Jake wanted to go to parties, they'd give him money for gas and tell him to have fun. When I wanted to attend programming camps or buy computer equipment, I had to use money from my part-time job at the local computer repair shop. The favoritism was so blatant that even extended family members commented on it, but Mom would just smile and say that Jake needs more support because he's more social. Dad usually stayed quiet during these conversations, though I could sometimes catch him looking uncomfortable when Mom's bias was particularly obvious. Jake coasted through high school on his charm and athletic ability, getting into a decent state university on a partial football scholarship. I, meanwhile, earned a full academic scholarship to MIT. You'd think that would have impressed our parents, but Mom's reaction was to worry about how Jake would feel about his brother going to a better school. She actually suggested I should consider staying closer to home, so Jake wouldn't feel overshadowed. That conversation was probably the moment I realized I'd never be the favored son, no matter what I accomplished. College was liberating. For the first time in my life, I was valued for my intelligence and technical skills, rather than compared unfavorably to my brother. I thrived at MIT, graduating summa cum laude with a computer science degree, and immediately landing a job at a top tech company in Boston. Jake, meanwhile, blew out his knee junior year, lost his scholarship, and barely managed to graduate with a business degree that he never really used. But whenever I came home for holidays, Mom would spend hours talking about Jake's potential and how he was figuring things out, while barely asking about my career. The final straw came when I was 28. I'd just gotten engaged to Sarah, a brilliant data scientist I'd met at work, and I was planning to start my own company. When I shared this news with the family, Mom's first question wasn't congratulations or asking about my plans. It was whether I'd considered hiring Jake as a partner since he had a business degree. I politely declined, explaining that I needed someone with technical expertise, not general business knowledge, especially in the critical early stages. Jake laughed it off at the time, saying he wasn't interested in nerd stuff anyway, but I could see the disappointment in Mom's eyes. That Christmas dinner turned into a disaster when Mom kept pushing the issue, suggesting that as brothers, we should support each other's success. When I finally lost my patience and pointed out that Jake had never once supported my achievements or even shown interest in what I did for work, she accused me of being jealous of Jake's social skills and said I was being selfish. Jake sat there smirking through the whole argument, occasionally adding fuel to the fire with comments like, "Mom, you know how he's always been with money," or "Some people just aren't family-oriented." That was the last family gathering I attended. I went low contact after that, only responding to direct questions in family group chats and skipping holidays. Dad would occasionally call to check in, and I could tell he wanted to bridge the gap, but he'd never stand up to Mom's favoritism. Sarah and I moved to Austin 2 years later when I launched SecureFlow Solutions. The business grew rapidly. Turns out there's huge demand for cybersecurity consulting, especially from companies that have been hacked and need someone to fix their systems and prevent future breaches. Within 3 years, I had 15 employees. Within 5 years, I was pulling in 8 figures annually. I was careful to keep my success off social media and never discussed money with family during our rare conversations. Dad passed away from a heart attack 3 years ago, and while that was devastating, it also meant even less reason to maintain contact with Mom and Jake. The funeral was awkward. I hadn't seen Jake in person for almost 4 years, and he'd changed. Gone was the cocky athlete I remembered. He looked soft around the middle, had a patchy beard, and kept making comments about how lucky I was to have such a successful business. Mom spent the entire reception telling people how proud she was of both her sons, conveniently omitting the fact that she'd barely spoken to me in years. After the funeral, I expected we'd go back to our minimal contact routine. I was wrong. About 6 months later, my mom called me out of the blue. This was unusual. She typically only called on my birthday or major holidays, and even then, the conversations were stilted and brief. "Honey, I've been going through your father's papers," she began, "and I found something that I think you need to know about." She claimed that Dad had kept a journal where he'd written about his hopes for his son's futures. According to her, he'd specifically written that he hoped Jake and I would eventually work together, combining my technical skills with Jake's business acumen. She said Dad had always dreamed of his boys building something together. I was skeptical, but I also felt guilty about our strained relationship and wondered if maybe Dad really had hoped we'd reconcile through business. I told Mom I'd think about it, but I wasn't making any promises. 2 weeks later, Jake called me directly for the first time in years. "Hey, brother," he said, using a term of endearment he'd never used when we were kids. Mom told me about Dad's journal. I've been thinking a lot about what he wanted for us. Jake explained that he'd been working various sales jobs since college, but had never found his calling. He said learning about Dad's wishes had made him realize that maybe we were meant to work together, that maybe he could help take my business to the next level. Despite my instincts screaming that this was a bad idea, I felt obligated to at least hear him out. We arranged to meet for lunch the following week when he'd be in Austin visiting friends. The lunch meeting should have been my first red flag. Jake didn't come alone. He brought his girlfriend, a woman named Melissa, who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. She was probably mid-20s, with long blonde hair, perfect makeup, and the kind of curves that made every man in the restaurant take a second look. "This is Melissa," Jake said proudly. "She's been helping me research your company and develop some ideas for how we could work together." Melissa smiled at me with perfectly white teeth and extended a manicured hand. "Jake's told me so much about you, David. I'm so impressed by what you've built. I have a background in marketing and business development, so I understand how challenging it must have been to grow a technical services company." I was immediately suspicious. Since when did Jake date women with business backgrounds? In high school and college, his girlfriends had typically been cheerleaders and party girls, not exactly the type to research cybersecurity companies. During lunch, Jake pitched his vision for our partnership. He wanted to come on as COO, handling all business development, client relationships, and company expansion. He claimed that with his people skills and business degree, he could help me scale the company nationally, maybe even internationally. "Think about it, David," he said, leaning forward earnestly. "You're brilliant at the technical stuff, but you've always been more comfortable behind a computer than in a boardroom. I could handle all the client-facing work, the networking, the big picture strategy. We'd be unstoppable together." Melissa nodded enthusiastically. "Jake has such natural charisma. I bet your clients would love working with him. And imagine how much more you could focus on innovation if you didn't have to worry about all the business side of things." I listened politely, but kept my responses non-committal. Jake seemed to interpret my silence as interest, because by the end of lunch, he was talking about specific percentages. "I was thinking a 50-50 partnership would be fair," he said casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "After all, Dad always said we were equals, and you'll need someone with real business experience if you want to compete with the big consulting firms." I nearly choked on my coffee. A 50-50 split? For someone who'd never worked a day in cybersecurity and hadn't been part of building the company from nothing. "Jake," I said carefully, "I think you're getting a little ahead of yourself. This is just an exploratory conversation." His face darkened slightly, but Melissa quickly jumped in with a dazzling smile. "Of course. We're just excited about the possibilities. Why don't we all get together again soon? Maybe I could see your office? I'd love to understand more about what you do." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. There was an undertone to her voice, a suggestion that she wanted to understand more than just my business. After they left, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Jake had gone from barely speaking to me for years to demanding half my company based on some supposed journal entry from Dad that I'd never seen. And this Melissa woman, there was something off about her. I decided to do what I do best: research. That evening, I started digging into Jake's recent history. Social media stalking revealed that he'd been unemployed for the past 8 months, after being fired from a car dealership for performance issues. His LinkedIn showed a pattern of short-term jobs, mostly in sales, with gaps between positions growing longer over time. Melissa was more interesting. Her Instagram showed the lifestyle of someone with money, expensive clothes, fancy restaurants, exotic vacations. But when I did a deeper dive, I found that her marketing and business development background was mostly working for multi-level marketing schemes and consulting for small businesses that had all failed within a year of hiring her. Most telling, though, was that Jake and Melissa had only been dating for 4 months, but every single one of her recent posts was designed to look like they'd been together much longer. She'd even posted old photos with other men, but cropped them out and added captions about my love that made it seem like she and Jake had a long history. This was starting to smell like a con. I called my lawyer, Mike Chen, who'd helped me set up the company initially. I explained the situation and asked him to review my corporate documents to make sure there was no way Jake could have any legitimate claim to ownership. David, unless you signed something or your father had some kind of ownership stake that I'm not aware of, there's no way Jake has any legal claim to your company, Mike assured me. But I'd be careful about any new contracts or agreements, and maybe we should think about tightening up your corporate structure. Meanwhile, Jake started calling me every few days, each time more pushy about moving forward with our partnership. He'd send me articles about successful brother business teams and kept mentioning Dad's supposed wishes. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later when Melissa texted me directly. "Hey David, I was wondering if you wanted to get coffee sometime? Just the two of us. I feel like we didn't really get to connect during lunch, and I have some ideas that might interest you." The winky emoji made her intentions pretty clear. I decided to play along and see what she was really after. We met at a trendy coffee shop in downtown Austin. Melissa had clearly dressed to impress, a low-cut blouse, short skirt, and heels that made her legs look like they went on forever. She spent the first 20 minutes asking detailed questions about my business, my clients, my revenue, my expansion plans. Then she started getting personal. "Jake's told me so much about your relationship growing up," she said, leaning closer. "He feels terrible that you two grew apart. He really looks up to you, you know?" This was news to me, considering Jake had spent our entire childhood treating me like an annoying afterthought. "He's been researching cybersecurity nonstop since you two had lunch," she continued. "He's so excited about the possibility of working together. I think he sees it as a chance to finally have the kind of relationship with you that he's always wanted." I made non-committal responses while she kept probing for more information about my business operations, my biggest clients, my profit margins. It was clear she was fishing for intelligence, not trying to build a relationship. Then she made her move. "David, can I be honest with you?" she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I think Jake might be selling himself short. From what I can see, you've built something amazing, but there's so much untapped potential. Someone with the right connections could help you expand in ways you've never imagined." Her hand lingered on mine, and she gave me a look that was definitely not about business development. "Maybe we should get together sometime when we can really talk," she purred. "Without Jake around, I think you and I could accomplish great things together." Bingo. She was trying to seduce me, probably hoping to get insider information she could use to help Jake in whatever scam they were running. I smiled and played dumb. "That's interesting, Melissa. What kind of connections are you thinking about?" For the next hour, she fed me a line of bullshit about investors she supposedly knew, government contracts she could help me land, international expansion opportunities. None of it was specific enough to be real, but all of it was designed to make me think she was the key to taking my business to the next level. As she talked, she kept finding excuses to touch my arm, lean in close, or make suggestive comments about how we could explore possibilities together. It was both pathetic and infuriating. When we parted ways, she hugged me just a little too long and whispered, "I hope we can do this again soon. I think we have a lot to offer each other." That night, I set up a hidden camera system in my home office and started recording every conversation I had with Jake or Melissa. I had a feeling I was going to need evidence of whatever they were planning. Sure enough, Jake called the next day, more aggressive than ever. "Dave, I've been patient, but I need to know where we stand," he said. "Melissa thinks you're interested in moving forward, and I don't want to waste any more time. I need to know if you're serious about honoring Dad's wishes." "What exactly did Dad write in this journal?" I asked. "I'd like to see it before making any major decisions." There was a pause. "Well, Mom has it, and she's not comfortable sharing it right now. It's too emotional for her, but she told you what it said." "Jake, I can't make a business decision based on secondhand information about a document I've never seen." His tone shifted to barely controlled anger. "Are you calling Mom a liar? Are you saying she's making this up?" "I'm saying I'd like to see evidence before giving away half of the company I built from scratch." "Giving away?" he exploded. "This isn't giving anything away. This is honoring our father's memory and finally working together like a real family. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You've always been selfish when it comes to family. I hung up on him. 2 days later, Mom called, crying. David, honey, Jake is so hurt, she sobbed. He just wants to be close to his brother. Why are you being so stubborn about this? Your father would be heartbroken to see you two fighting. Mom, I'm not fighting with anyone. I just want to see this journal entry before making any business decisions. I can't show it to you right now. It's too painful. But I promise you, David, your father wanted his boys to work together. He was so proud of both of you. This was rich, considering Dad had barely known what I did for work and had never once visited my office or asked about my business. If Dad really wanted us to work together, why didn't he ever mention it to me when he was alive? I asked. Mom's crying intensified. Because he didn't want to pressure you. He knew you needed to find your own way first. But now that you're successful, it's time to help your brother. There it was. The real truth. This wasn't about Dad's wishes or bringing the family together. This was about Mom wanting me to take care of her golden child now that Jake had proven incapable of supporting himself. I told Mom I needed time to think about it, and hung up. That weekend, Melissa texted me again, suggesting we meet for drinks. I agreed, curious to see how far she'd push things. She showed up at the upscale bar wearing a dress that was barely legal, and made sure to sit close enough that her leg pressed against mine. After 2 drinks, she was practically in my lap. David, I'm going to be direct with you, she said, her hand on my thigh. I think you and I have chemistry, real chemistry, and I think we could help each other in ways that go beyond business. She leaned in close, her lips nearly touching my ear. Jake doesn't have to know about our private consultations. I could give you information that would help you make the right decisions about the partnership, and you could help me understand how a really successful man operates. I almost laughed at how obvious she was being. Instead, I decided to test something. That's interesting, Melissa. What kind of information are you thinking about? She smiled seductively. Well, I know Jake's been talking to some lawyers about his rights to the company. He seems to think he might have stronger legal grounds than you realize. But if we had our own arrangement, I could make sure you stay ahead of whatever he's planning. Now we were getting somewhere. What lawyers? I probably shouldn't say, she said coyly, trailing her finger along my arm. But maybe if we went somewhere more private, I could tell you more. I made an excuse about having an early morning meeting and left her at the bar looking frustrated. The next morning, I hired a private investigator named Tom Rodriguez, who specialized in financial fraud cases. I gave him everything I had on Jake and Melissa and asked him to dig deeper. What he found was even worse than I'd suspected. Tom discovered that Melissa's real name was actually Miranda Walsh, and she had a history of targeting successful men in various scams. Her MO was to identify wealthy targets, research their family dynamics, then position herself as someone who could help manipulate family relationships for financial gain. Jake, meanwhile, had been contacting lawyers, but not about legitimate ownership claims. He'd been shopping around for attorneys who would help him file nuisance lawsuits against my company, hoping to force me into a settlement rather than deal with prolonged legal battles. Most damning of all, Tom found text messages between Jake and Melissa. He had contacts in the cell phone industry who could access deleted messages for legal investigations. The messages revealed their entire plan. They'd been planning this scam for months, ever since Jake had discovered through mutual acquaintances how successful my company had become. Melissa had researched my business, my personal life, and my family dynamics. They'd coached each other on how to approach me, with Melissa playing the role of the supportive girlfriend while also being available as a backup plan if seduction worked better than family pressure. The journal story was completely fabricated. In fact, the text messages showed them laughing about how gullible I was and how easy it would be to manipulate me using Dad's memory. Their plan was multi-pronged. Jake would pressure me using family guilt while Melissa gathered intelligence through seduction. If I agreed to any kind of partnership, they'd use that foothold to gradually take over more of the company. If I refused, Jake would file harassment and discrimination lawsuits claiming I was denying him opportunities based on family bias, hoping to force a settlement that would give him money even without ownership. But the most enraging part was a message from Jake to Melissa that said, David's always been a pushover when it comes to family. Mom's got him trained to feel guilty about everything. This is going to be easier than we thought. Reading those messages made my blood boil. They thought I was some kind of weak, guilty pushover they could manipulate with fake tears and family pressure. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I spent the next 2 weeks carefully planning my response. First, I had Mike Chen draft airtight cease and desist letters to both Jake and Melissa, explicitly forbidding them from making any claims about ownership in my company and warning them that any attempts to interfere with my business relationships would result in legal action. Then I did something that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. I decided to go nuclear on my own family. I gathered all the evidence Tom had collected, the text messages, the background checks, the financial records showing Jake's unemployment and Melissa's scam history, and compiled it into a comprehensive dossier. On a Thursday evening, I called Jake and told him I'd made my decision about the partnership. I've thought about Dad's wishes, I said, and I think you're right. We should be working together. Why don't you and Melissa come to my office tomorrow afternoon? I'll show you around, we can discuss terms, and maybe we can make this partnership official. Jake was ecstatic. David, you won't regret this. We're going to build something incredible together. This is what Dad would have wanted. I scheduled the meeting for 3 p.m. on Friday, knowing that most of my employees would still be in the office to witness whatever happened. Friday afternoon, Jake and Melissa arrived dressed like they were already executives of my company. Jake wore an expensive suit that he probably couldn't afford, and Melissa was in a power dress that somehow still managed to show enough cleavage to be inappropriate for a business meeting. I welcomed them into my office, where I'd set up a conference table with folders, legal pads, and water bottles, all the props of a serious business meeting. Before we get started, I said, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're discussing here. Jake nodded eagerly. Absolutely. I'm thinking we start with a 50-50 partnership, like we discussed, and then we can talk about expansion plans, new markets, maybe bringing Melissa on as our marketing director. Melissa smiled and nodded. I have so many ideas for growing the business. I think we could double your revenue within the first year. That sounds ambitious, I said, opening one of the folders on the table. Before we move forward, though, I need to address a few concerns. I slid a copy of the private investigator's report across the table to Jake. This is a background check I had done as part of my due diligence. Jake's face went pale as he saw the first page, which included Melissa's real name and a summary of her scam history. What the hell is this? He demanded. It's the truth about your girlfriend and your little plan to defraud me, I said calmly. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate before giving away half my company? Melissa tried to maintain her composure. David, I don't know what you think you found, but I know your real name is Miranda Walsh, I interrupted. I know you've been involved in at least 4 similar scams targeting wealthy men. I know you've been coaching Jake on how to manipulate me using our family relationships. I opened another folder and pulled out copies of their text messages. I also know that Dad never wrote anything about wanting us to work together, because this entire story is something you two made up. These are your text messages discussing how to fool me. Jake's face had gone from pale to red. You had our phones hacked? That's illegal. No, Jake, it's not. This was obtained through a legitimate legal investigation, which brings me to the best part. I opened a third folder and pulled out copies of his communications with various lawyers. I know you've been shopping around for attorneys who would help you file nuisance lawsuits against my company. I know your plan was to either manipulate me into giving you ownership or force me into a settlement through frivolous legal action. By now, both Jake and Melissa were looking like trapped animals. Jake stood up abruptly. You know what, David? Fuck you. I don't need your charity. I was trying to help you out of family loyalty, but clearly you don't give a damn about family. Sit down, Jake, I said firmly. We're not done. Something in my tone made him hesitate. See, the thing is, I do care about family. I care about protecting myself and my business from family members who think they can scam me. So I've taken some precautions. I opened the final folder and pulled out copies of the cease and desist letters Mike had prepared. These are legal notices formally warning both of you to stop making any claims about ownership in my company and to cease any attempts to interfere with my business. If you violate these terms, I will sue you for harassment, attempted fraud, and business interference. Melissa found her voice. You can't prove we did anything illegal. Maybe not criminal fraud, I agreed, but I can prove attempted extortion, harassment, and conspiracy to interfere with my business relationships. I can also prove that you've been using a false identity and have a history of similar scams. I leaned back in my chair, here's what's going to happen. You're both going to sign acknowledgments that you have no claim to any ownership in my company. You're going to agree to have no further contact with me, my employees, or my business partners. And Jake, you're going to tell Mom the truth about this whole ridiculous scheme. Jake's jaw dropped. I'm not telling Mom anything. She believes in us working together. Oh, but you are, I said, smiling for the first time since they'd arrived. Because if you don't, I'm going to send copies of this entire investigation to every member of our extended family, along with a detailed explanation of how you tried to defraud your own brother using Dad's memory. I pulled out my phone and showed them the draft email I'd prepared with about 30 family members in the recipient list. I'm also going to post it on social media and tag everyone we went to high school with. I think they'd be very interested to learn what Jake Morrison has been up to lately." Melissa looked like she was going to be sick. "You wouldn't actually try me," I said flatly. "I built this company from nothing while dealing with a family that never supported me. You think I'm going to let you destroy it with lies and manipulation? You picked the wrong target." Jake was staring at the email on my phone, probably calculating how many people would see it and how humiliating it would be. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want you to sign these agreements, leave my office, and never contact me again unless someone is dying. I want you to tell Mom that you lied about Dad's journal and that this whole partnership idea was a scheme you cooked up because you're unemployed and desperate." I stood up and walked around the table to face them directly. "And I want both of you to understand that if you ever try anything like this again, if you ever mention my name to a lawyer, if you ever claim any connection to my business, if you ever come anywhere near my employees or my office, I will dedicate every resource I have to destroying your lives. I will sue you into bankruptcy. I will make sure everyone you know understands exactly what kind of people you are, and I will use every contact I have in the business world to make sure neither of you can ever find decent employment again." The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Jake reached for the pen. "This is really fucked up, David," he muttered as he signed the papers. "No, Jake," I replied. "What's fucked up is trying to steal from your own brother and using your dead father's memory to do it. What's fucked up is bringing a con artist into our family to help you commit fraud. What's fucked up is thinking you could manipulate me the same way Mom manipulated me when we were kids." Melissa signed next, her hand shaking slightly. "There's one more thing," I said as they prepared to leave. "Jake, I want you to call Mom right now and tell her the truth. I'm not... You're going to call her, put it on speaker, and explain that you made up the journal story because you wanted money from me. If you don't, that email goes out to the family in 1 hour." Jake's shoulders slumped in defeat. He pulled out his phone and dialed Mom's number. "Hi, Mom," he said when she answered. "I'm here with David, and I need to tell you something." "Oh, that's wonderful. Are you boys finalizing the partnership?" Jake looked at me with pure hatred in his eyes. "No, Mom. There's not going to be a partnership. I need to tell you that I made up the story about Dad's journal." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Dad never wrote about wanting us to work together. I made that up because I thought I could convince David to give me part of his company." I could hear Mom's sharp intake of breath through the phone. "Jake, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I lied to you and to David because I'm broke, and I thought this was a way to fix my problems. I'm sorry, Mom. I know this is disappointing." The silence stretched out for nearly 30 seconds before Mom spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "Jacob Morrison, how could you do this? How could you lie about your father's memory like that?" For the first time since I'd known him, Jake looked genuinely ashamed. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was desperate and I thought..." "You thought you could steal from your brother and drag me into it?" she said, her voice getting stronger. "You thought you could use me to pressure him into giving you something you had no right to." "Mom, it wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," she snapped. "My God, Jake, what has happened to you?" Jake looked at me again, probably hoping I'd intervene, but I just stared back at him impassively. "I'm disappointed in both of us," Mom continued. "I'm disappointed in you for lying and trying to cheat your brother, and I'm disappointed in myself for believing you without question. David, are you there?" "I'm here, Mom. Honey, I am so sorry. I should have asked more questions. I should have realized. I just wanted so badly for you boys to have a relationship that I didn't stop to think about whether this made sense." I felt a tiny bit of my anger toward her soften, but only a tiny bit. "Mom, we'll talk later. Right now, I need Jake and his girlfriend to leave my office." "Jake has a girlfriend?" Mom asked. Jake shot me a warning look, but I was done protecting him. Her real name is Miranda Walsh, and she specializes in conning money out of successful men by manipulating their family relationships. She and Jake have been planning this scam for months. The silence on the phone was deafening. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice cold as ice. "Jake, you get yourself home right now. We are going to have a very long conversation." After Jake hung up, he and Melissa gathered their things and headed for the door. Jake paused at the threshold. "David, I know you hate me right now, but we're still brothers." I looked at him for a long moment, thinking about everything we'd been through, the years of favoritism, the constant comparisons, the way he'd treated me growing up, and now this ultimate betrayal. "No, Jake," I said finally. "Brothers don't try to steal from each other. Brothers don't lie about their dead father to commit fraud. You're just someone I used to know who happens to share some DNA." He flinched like I'd hit him, but he didn't argue. After they left, I sat in my office for a while, processing everything that had happened. My assistant knocked on the door to check if I was okay. Apparently, the tension had been visible even through the glass walls. I called Sarah to tell her what had happened. She'd known about Jake's initial approach and had been suspicious from the start. "I'm proud of you for standing up to them," she said. "I know that couldn't have been easy." It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time in my life, I'd refused to be manipulated by family guilt and had protected what I'd worked so hard to build. Over the next few weeks, I heard through Mom that Jake had moved back in with her temporarily while he looked for work. Apparently, Melissa Miranda had disappeared immediately after our confrontation, leaving Jake to face the consequences alone. Mom called me a few days later to apologize again and to ask if there was any way I could forgive Jake. "Mom, Jake is 32 years old," I told her. "He's not some confused kid who made a mistake. He spent months planning to defraud me, brought a career criminal into our family, and tried to use Dad's memory to steal from me. Those aren't the actions of someone who deserves forgiveness." "But he's your brother." "No, Mom. He's your son, and you can have whatever relationship with him you want. But he's not my brother anymore. Brothers don't try to destroy each other." I wasn't completely heartless, though. A month later, when I heard that Jake was genuinely looking for work and had enrolled in a community college program to get some new skills, I had a friend who runs a small marketing company give him an interview. Jake got the job, an entry-level position that paid about a tenth of what he'd been hoping to steal from me, but it was honest work. I never told Jake that I'd helped him get the interview. I figured if he was really trying to turn his life around, he could do it without knowing I'd been involved. As for Mom and me, we're slowly rebuilding our relationship. She's made a real effort to understand why the favoritism hurt so much and has acknowledged that she contributed to Jake's entitlement issues. We have lunch once a month now, and she's made it clear that she's proud of what I've accomplished.